Righty, emergency broadcast. The Canadian government is doing a very late night emergency parliament meeting over the conflict that just really escalated earlier today. While they were actually, right before they were doing a question period, you had a massive bombardment of Iranian missiles, I mean, destroying, a tremendous amount of different parts of Israel. For some reason, the Iron Dome wasn't working. It got overloaded. Who knows? But now Israel is preparing for their attack, right? Their retaliatory attack. And Canada, who is trying to keep peace in the Middle East. I don't know why we've, self-imposed, like we've taken that on, not us in particular, but the government is like, hey, let's add more problems to our plate. Let's just try and solve peace in the Middle East by pissing everybody off equally. We also are allies with Israel. And so you have a lot of discrepancies within Canadian government. You have a lot of MPs like Anthony Housefather, Liberal MP, who, has pretty much said he wants to leave the Liberal Party, wants to leave Justin Trudeau's party because of all the anti-Semitism and the pro-Hamas, pro-Palestine, pro-Hezbollah embers that are mostly on the NDP, which is kind of crazy. But nonetheless, they're doing an emergency debate. So we're taking a look at that right now. So buckle up. I don't normally do this. I don't normally do these late night debates. Normally I just exclusively stream question period, but it came across my feed. It came to my attention. I was like, oh crap, we should probably focus on this. So buckle up, have yourself a beer. I know it's dinner time. It's past dinner time for a lot of you. We're gonna watch this together here. So get ready, folks. Smash that like button, before we begin. Here we go. It's already started. I've gone back just a little bit, but you'll see why here. Okay.
Honourable member from Sherwood Park, Fort Saskatchewan.
Point of order. The member's comments, the aspersions she just cast, are clearly unparliamentary, inaccurate and unparliamentary. And I ask that you call her to order on that. It's not.
I regret that the chair hadn't heard the comments as it was in transition between two speakers, but I will have to come back later to that point. Questions and comments, questions et commentaires. The honourable member from Kitchener Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to start by saying thank you to our colleague from Edmonton Strathcona for ensuring that this debate happens today. I also want to thank her for centering the implications on all civilians, whether those are Lebanese civilians, Israeli civilians, or Palestinian. In her speech, she spoke about the need for de-escalation and diplomacy. Obviously,
can you guys hear it all right?
Canadian government.
Is it loud enough?
Diplomatic effort. I wonder if she could elaborate on what she would like to see from this government to do better when it comes to moving forward our role on the world stage towards those diplomatic solutions.
Yes, this debate is live right now.
As she said, there is a sliver of opportunity remaining for.
The honourable member from Edmonton Strathcona.
Okay. So the debate is about what are we doing between, you can see right here, Lebanon and Israel. It's the emergency debate for the crisis in Lebanon and Israel. And you've got different parties that are saying, hey, what's going on? Are we supporting Lebanon with humanitarian aid? Are we supporting Israel with ground troops? Canada is extremely conflicted right now. Extremely conflicted, folks. All right, I'm going to repeat this before I play it again. Canada is an ally to Israel. We're not so much allies with Lebanon, but we have just deployed and committed $10+ million of humanitarian aid to Lebanon. And so it's, we're in a tricky, we've put ourselves in a very, very tricky situation. No, I don't think Justin Trudeau is going to be there, but you never know. You never know. They're going to zoom out and we'll be able to see who's actually there. It's pretty empty, but again, it's an emergency debate. It very, very rarely happens.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I would like to thank my colleague for that question, because I think that's what we're here debating today, and there are some very important steps that the government could take. Canada has a long history of being, as I said in my speech, not just peacekeepers, but peace builders, and playing that role with diplomacy. We are a G7 country. We have the ability to use our diplomatic tools at our disposal to work with our allies and bring things forward. Some of the key pieces that I think need to be done. Right now, there needs to be an arms embargo. We need to ensure that no arms are getting to either side of the combatants that are using them against innocent civilians. And we know that there are loopholes in that need to be closed. We should be using our sanctions effectively to sanction Netanyahu and those within his administration. You know, we have seen sanctions on Hamas. Absolutely, we support that, and frankly, we don't need them because they are a listed terrorist organization already. Any member is a listed terrorist organization. We also need to support the ICC and the ICJ, the International Criminal Justice System, not only in certain cases, but in all cases.
Question.
A quick question.
The honourable member from Trinity Spadina.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I feel an obligation to remind my NDP colleague that defense is not escalation. And since October 7th, over 8,000 rockets have been fired at Israel. And I would suggest if you've been silent while those rockets have been fired, you're not an advocate for peace. You're apologizing for a terrorist group. So my question to my colleague is, why have you been silent? I've taken a look at Hansard. You've mentioned Hezbollah once. You've tweeted about it only once, criticizing Israel when they responded to Hezbollah.
So, two things. I would like to just remind all members that questions and answers should be put through the chair and not directly to members. And secondly, to allow the member to have, in the time allotted, I did ask for a very brief question. The honourable member from Edmonton Strathcona with a brief answer.
Well, that's frankly not true. The New Democrats have been very clear in our stance. We've been, since the very beginning, have been very clear that Hamas is a terrorist organization, and we condemn what they did in Israel on October 7th. That's been extraordinarily clear, and I've mentioned that multiple times in multiple different forums.
Thanks for the dollar super chat there, Joe Ralph.
Resuming debate, the honourable member from London Fanshawe.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I want to thank the honourable member from Edmonton Strathcona for bringing this emergency debate forward tonight. She has been an incredible advocate, a fighter for so many people who need that voice in this place, and I am so grateful for her advocacy every single day. I also want to acknowledge the extremely disturbing and unacceptable recent attack in my community, targeting Muslim women wearing hijabs in front of their children and their family members. And I continuously want to say that I can't believe that this happens in my hometown, the place that I grew up in. But I can't say that anymore. And this level of hatred has reared its ugly head in my home far too often. Anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, anti-Palestinian hate is on the rise across our country. Londoners have endured so much. They saw the tragic killing of our London family. They've watched their family members killed in Israel, in Sudan, in Gaza, and now in Lebanon. We need to all recognize how our words in this place on what is happening in the Middle East can turn to horrible acts at home. The vilification of Muslims, of Palestinians, and Jewish people is fueling the rise of hate and the dehumanization of our fellow Canadians. They need all parties in this place to come together and fight for justice and peace in the Middle East. Almost a full year ago, the NDP was fighting for a ceasefire. We called for the release of the hostages and the de-escalation and the protection of innocent civilians from Israel's siege on Gaza. The Palestinian community were repeatedly told that this was a short incursion to defeat Hamas, but nearly 1 year later, those bombings have only increased. We have seen over 40,000 Palestinians killed, including so many children. And we have seen the indiscriminate bombing of Palestinian schools and hospitals. We have witnessed the occurrence of war crimes. We have watched in horror as such incursions have turned into a genocide. And now there's a ground incursion in Lebanon. Lebanon has already suffered the deadliest day of war since 2006, with hundreds of rockets attacking Lebanon. Lebanese Canadians are worried sick for their loved ones, many of whom are trapped or fleeing their homes and seeing the communities they love destroyed. They do not want war. My constituents have directly told me again and again, we do not want war. The people of Lebanon deserve to live in peace. They deserve to be able to rebuild their country. As a member of Edmonton Strathcona stated, and I think it bears repeating, tonight we are here to speak of that crisis in Lebanon, but only hours ago, Iran launched missiles at Israel and further escalating this global crisis and threatening more civilians. We unequivocally condemn this. Civilians in Israel and in Gaza and in Lebanon and in the wider region are paying for our political futures, or our failures. She said this very clearly, our political failures. We have seen this escalation of violence because we have not held up a universal standard of international law, because we have tolerated the erosion of the rules-based international order. Lebanese Canadians deserve the full protection of our government. The Minister of Defense, Bill Blair, said he isn't, the Minister of Defense, Mr. Speaker, said that he isn't confident Canadian Armed Forces can actually
you can't
do
say
mass
people's
evacuations
names.
of Lebanese Canadians. This is unacceptable. These Canadians are fleeing an invasion by a country Canada describes as an ally. There have already been reports of Canadians dying in Lebanon, and the government has still not coordinated a military evacuation. It is shameful that these Canadians are being told to evacuate by commercial flight on their own dime. Lebanese Canadians are worried about getting their loved ones back after seeing how the Liberals have handled the special measures immigration program for Palestinians.
Yeah, it sounds like there's a child
report
there.
by Canadians for Justice and Peace in the Middle East, they show how the temporary resident visa program for Gazans was intended to fail. Despite increasing their shameful, racist, and arbitrary cap from 1,000 to 5,000, no one has been able to come to Canada. Palestinians who have been able to arrive have done so on their own, with no help from this government. But let me be clear, Canada can stand up for Lebanese Canadians and their loved ones. They can stand up for international law. They can stand up to Israel's horrific war crimes. But the government lacks the courage to do so. This is something that I've also heard repeatedly from my constituents, the continual disappointment that they have in this Liberal government. Canadian Armed Forces have a presence in the region. They are stationed. They could be called upon to assist in the evacuation of Lebanese Canadians. We can stand up to Netanyahu's extremist government, clearly stating that we will not diplomatically support their ongoing genocide. We will not support their invasion and bombing of Lebanon. And we can sanction their war cabinet. We can stand up to the Israel Defense Forces by implementing an immediate arms embargo on Israel. We can stand up to the United States, making it clear that we will review the U.S.-Canada Defense Production Sharing Agreement and not allow Canadian-made arms to be used in war crimes by Israel. But this government refuses to do so. Today, we need to call on all parties to recognize an immediate ceasefire in Lebanon. The war between the extremist Netanyahu regime and Hezbollah, a terrorist organization, has led to 1,000 deaths, 6,000 wounded, and more than 1 million displaced in Lebanon. War crimes must not beget war crimes. We need to stand up for Lebanese civilians that don't want to see their country face another war. They have struggled for so many years to rebuild their country, to rebuild their systems, to rebuild their infrastructure. Lebanon is already facing the worst economic crisis in history, endured because of the largest non-nuclear explosion ever recorded. Lebanon needs our support. The government of Canada must work with the international community to ensure the UN Resolution 1701 is implemented in Lebanon in full and immediately. We need to ensure the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Lebanon is respected. The United Nations interim force in Lebanon has clearly stated any crossing into Lebanon is a violation of Lebanese sovereignty and territorial integrity and a violation of Resolution 1701. We urge all actors to step back from such escalatory acts, which will only lead to more violence and more bloodshed. The price of continuing the current course of action is too high. Civilians have to be protected, civilian infrastructure must not be targeted, and international law has to be respected. Mr. Speaker, I can't imagine what it must be like to watch the news reports of your country of birth being bombed. To see your homes destroyed, a home that you had grown up in, to see all those memories wiped away. I know that I have staff in my offices that are impacted by this. We have staff here in this place that are impacted. They don't know where their loved ones are. They can't get a hold of them. I can't imagine that terror to witness friends displaced, desperate. You're literally holding your breath in fear, hoping desperately you will not get that bad news. And to all of those people, I am so sorry that Canada isn't the strength that it needs to be. Because then those same people who have given so much to this institution, to this work that we are supposed to go forward with, can't rely upon the country that they have made their home for the support that they need, for those family members, those friends, those neighbors still there. I have held countless constituents while they cry about this. But I say that we can stand up. That Canada can be a force for peace. We can be. So I ask this place for my constituents, for all Lebanese for Canadians, Israeli Canadians, Palestinian Canadians. We need to do better. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Oh my God.
Questions and comments.
So this is like the crazy thing about Canada becoming an international airport. I just quickly Googled the Lebanese, how many people live in Lebanon or live in Canada from Lebanon. And Google says the Lebanese community in Canada includes between 200,000 and 400,000. And it's a government website, so it's likely, not been updated yet. January 12th was the last update. So estimated probably closer to 500,000 people, 500,000 Lebanese people live in Canada. And this is the reality of Canada, self-imposing this title of being an international airport. Basically, is that now every other country's problems are becoming our problems because we have people from those countries that live here. 500,000 people, man, that's crazy. For the $2 super chat from Gorov, and nobody is in the house. Correct. There's very few people. Jagmeet's actually in the house. Jagmeet, and a couple other conservatives that you'll recognize.
The honourable member from Sherwood Park, Fort Saskatchewan.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. As leaders in this Parliament, I think it is critically important that we speak for universal human solidarity.
She's talking to us.
And for empathy. Clearly, we believe that the dignity of the human person is universal and not dependent on any factor such as citizenship, national origin, place, age, degree of vulnerability, etc. From that basic moral ground, we have to then think about policy actions that will concretely make a difference. I asked the previous NDP speaker and didn't get an answer at all. I just got personal insults, but it was a serious question. The previous member said Hezbollah and its leaders should be brought to justice. The question is, how would the NDP propose to bring Hezbollah and its leaders to justice?
The honourable member from London Fanshawe.
Mr. Speaker, I think that the comments from the honourable member for Edmonton Strathcona were bang on. But I think that further on in a lot of the questions that she tried to answer following this honourable member, it was very clear Canada has actually shown itself in some regards on the world stage. It's shown itself to follow rulings of the ICC and the ICJ for other countries. It's followed on and followed through, not as successfully as we would have liked, but they have tried to put forward sanctions. In the case of Ukraine, they have been supportive. So I ask for that consistency when it comes to Gaza, when it comes to Palestine, when it comes to Lebanon, when it comes to everyone across this globe. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
L'honorable député de Saint-Hyacinthe-Bagotte.
The honourable member for Saint-Hyacinthe-Bagotte. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'd like to thank my colleague for her speech, and I'd also like to thank the NDP for having brought this forward today as a topic for the emergency debate.
So I did pause it. Before I went live. So we got a little bit of wiggle room here. You know what I'm saying? I can do that. And we got a little bit of wiggle room. I can't do too much. I can't go forward too much. It is live, but I did pause it.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I want to thank my colleague for her important speech this evening. Mr. Speaker, I think it's so important that we are taking the time, which my colleague does all the time, to talk about the impacts on people, Lebanese, Canadians, Canadians here who are seeing their families unsure of their future moving forward. And I'm wondering if the member could share what real impact she's hearing from constituents, from Canadians across the country, of a government that is not taking the action required.
The honourable member from London Fanshawe has 40 seconds.
I want to thank my honourable colleague for that really great question. And as I said, sometimes I just end up holding people who break down because they're trying to be so strong for their families. They're trying to demand action from this government, and they're not seeing it. Many have felt extremely frustrated, and they see it as systemic racism that hasn't been addressed in terms of the response. And all I can tell them is that we will continue to try and continue to push and hope that we will get somewhere with this government. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Reprise du débat, resuming debate. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Foreign Affairs.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I want to begin by thanking the New Democratic Party.
Didn't she
bringing
quit?
this forward for the emergency debate this evening. Mr. Speaker, there must be no war in Lebanon, full stop. This most recent outbreak of conflict is part of a long-standing cycle of violence in the Middle East. History has taught us that civilians always bear the heaviest price of such senseless violence. The continued attacks by Hamas, a terrorist organization, on Israel are unacceptable. Hezbollah, another terrorist organization, has been launching rockets at Israel for nearly a year. And today's attack by Iran, a state sponsor of terror, on Israel is devastating. We have reports of hundreds of long-range ballistic missiles from Iran, some of which have hit Tel Aviv and Jerusalem. We unequivocally condemn this unprecedented escalation, which forced millions of Israelis to take shelter. We reaffirm Israel's right to defend itself. These attacks only serve to further destabilize the region. Canada will continue to do everything in its power to hold Iran accountable for its role in funding terrorist organizations. We urge all parties involved to respect international humanitarian law, protect civilians and humanitarian workers, and avoid any actions that could ignite a regional war. Mr. Speaker, we're gravely concerned for civilians in Lebanon, thousands of whom are Canadian. The safety and security of our citizens at home and abroad is our top priority. Thus far, we have been devastated by the deaths of 2 Canadians, Hussein and Daud Tabaja, killed by an IDF airstrike while fleeing Beirut. All they sought, Mr. Speaker, was to live in security, peace, and dignity. The Minister of Foreign Affairs has spoken to the sons of Hussein and Daud. While extending her deepest condolences on the passing of the parents, the Minister also made clear that she would do all in her power to ensure Canadians in Lebanon are kept safe. The potential of wider conflict across the Middle East has not been more imminent for decades. The costs of inaction are far too great, Mr. Speaker. And I also wanted to say that I'll be sharing my time with the member for Mississauga, Erin Mills. Mr. Speaker, we owe it to the people of Lebanon, Israel, and the region to make tangible progress towards peace and stability. Canada is exploring every possible avenue to ensure a diplomatic solution to the crisis between Hezbollah and Israel. Immediate action to stop the violence is urgently needed. Canada is committed to continuing its work with the international community to help advance peace in the region. Alongside our allies, we have endorsed a diplomatic settlement and called for an immediate 21-day ceasefire across the Lebanon-Israeli border to provide space for diplomacy. We are also pushing for full compliance with United Nations Security Council Resolution 1701, which calls for the cessation of hostilities in Lebanon. The Prime Minister has engaged leaders from across the region in search of a diplomatic resolution to the conflict. In the past days alone, the Prime Minister has had the opportunity to discuss the situation between Hezbollah and Israel with the Prime Minister of Lebanon and the King of Jordan. Last week, the Minister of Foreign Affairs was in New York to attend the 79th United Nations General Assembly. And while there, she called on all parties, including the governments of Israel and Lebanon, to endorse the temporary ceasefire immediately. In the past days, the Foreign Minister has also met with the Prime Minister of Lebanon, the Foreign Minister of Lebanon, G7 foreign ministers, Arab foreign ministers, and has been in contact with the Israeli Foreign Minister. The message was consistent and clear. We must see a de-escalation of tensions at the border between Lebanon and Israel. Mr. Speaker, in response to the worsening conditions in Lebanon, Canada is stepping up its humanitarian efforts. On Saturday, the government announced an additional $10 million in humanitarian assistance to address the urgent needs.
Yeah, see, that's the part that I don't get. Canada is allies with Israel. So indirectly, Canada supports Israel defending itself. Actually, directly, Canada supports Israel defending itself. Canada says that all the time. So we support the people doing the bombing, and then we go to the people that have been bombed and say, hey, do you need bandages? Do you need food? Do you need water? We're sorry you got bombed. By the way, Israel, go ahead and do it again because we support the right to defend yourself. This doesn't make any sense. And then they called for a ceasefire. None of this makes any sense. The thing that would make the most sense is if we stopped concentrating on this other shit around the world and we focused here on our own people. $10 million to humanitarian aid, freak $10 million to fixing our own infrastructure. Come on, man.
Conflict. This funding will provide food, water, emergency health care, protection services, and other life-saving aid to the more than 1 million people believed to be newly displaced. This contribution is in addition to the $10 million already allocated by the United Nations Central Emergency Response Fund, bringing Canada's total humanitarian assistance for Lebanon in 2024 to $37 million. Mr. Speaker, we've been advising Canadians in Lebanon to leave since October of 2023. As the security situation along the border between Israel and Lebanon has been deteriorating, we have been clear with Canadians that now is not the time to travel to Lebanon. The Beirut International Airport remains open to commercial flights. We've already helped secure the departure of hundreds of Canadians through commercial means. Today, we announced that we will increase commercial flight capacity out of Lebanon by securing an additional 800 seats over the course of the next 3 days for Canadians, permanent residents, and their immediate family. There is a flight scheduled to depart today. To Canadians in Lebanon, it is critical that you leave now. If you have not registered with the Registration of Canadians Abroad, or ROCA, do so now. It is through this system that Canadian consular officials and embassy staff will communicate and transmit instructions to those in danger. If you're offered a seat on a commercial flight by ROCA, take it as soon as possible. Canadians looking to leave Lebanon should also make sure their travel documents and those of their spouse and dependent children are up to date and secure. We will continue to work with industry, international partners, and like-minded countries to coordinate contingency planning efforts to respond should the situation further deteriorate. In the past months, the Minister of Foreign Affairs has visited the region several times to secure agreements with like-minded countries in the event that a large-scale evacuation of Canadians in Lebanon is necessary. We have also increased our diplomatic, consular, and security capabilities in the region such that we can respond more quickly and effectively as the situation continues to worsen. Mr. Speaker, we will exercise every tool at our disposal to ensure that Canadians, permanent residents, and their immediate families in Lebanon are safe. We call on all parties to accept the temporary ceasefire. Should any members of the House require support in providing consular services to their constituents, they should encourage them to reach out to the Emergency Watch and Response Centre and should not hesitate to contact me or Global Affairs Canada. Mr. Speaker, the situation in the Middle East is an unspeakable tragedy. Civilians in Lebanon, Israel, and across the region must be protected and cannot bear the cost of this conflict. Canada is committed to not only ensuring the safety and security of its citizens, but also to reaching a diplomatic settlement in this conflict. Canada has joined allies in calling for an immediate 21-day ceasefire across the Lebanon-Israel border. All parties, including the governments of Israel and Lebanon, must endorse the temporary ceasefire immediately. And of course, at the same time, we continue to call for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza. Canada is committed to the pursuit of peace. We will continue to work with our international partners to advance stability in the Middle East, and we will do everything in our power to protect civilians, hold bad actors accountable, and push for a peaceful resolution to this conflict. Mr. Speaker, now is the time to give a real chance for diplomacy and for peace. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
I'm clapping that she's done.
The honourable member from Thornhill.
Mr. Speaker, I want to know from the honourable member what she means when she utters the talking points about Israel having the right to defend itself. Is it that they can intercept hundreds of ballistic missiles in a single day, and that's where that ends? I just want to know if she's clear on what she's actually being told to read in this House.
The honourable member, the honourable parliamentary secretary to the Minister of Foreign Affairs and Consular Services.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I want to assure you that through you to the honourable member that these are not talking points. That what has been happening to Israel, and I mentioned this in my speech, where they have been attacked by 2 terrorist organizations as well as a state that sponsors terror, is unacceptable. And I'm actually insulted that she doesn't give credit to myself and to our government, that we actually care about the people of Israel and calls them talking points. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member from Burnaby South.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm deeply concerned for families in Lebanon who are fleeing for their lives, already rocked by death and grief as Netanyahu's extremist government pushes a ground offensive. I'm distressed for families in Israel that have had to deal with rockets and missiles launched by Iran and Hezbollah, which is clearly a terrorist group recognized by Canadian law. I'm heartbroken for Gaza and Palestinians who are currently undergoing daily horror by Netanyahu's extremist government. But this liberal government has failed to take action. They failed to impose a 2-way arms embargo. They failed to impose strict sanctions on Netanyahu's war cabinet. Why did this government fail to take actions to do their part to stop the escalation of conflict in the region?
The honourable parliamentary secretary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the honourable member for his question. When it comes to arms exports, the minister has said we've not approved export permits since January the 8th. And we will always support Israel's security, and this includes permits for the Iron Dome. And Mr. Speaker, I would disagree with the honourable member that we're not doing anything. I firmly believe that we are, in fact, doing everything that we can as a country to work towards a ceasefire in the region and for peace in the region. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The
honourable member for Saint-Hyacinthe-Bagotte. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Earlier, I asked a question of the NDP colleague, and now she suggested that I ask it to the government. Good idea. That's what I'll do. Has the government used all means of pressure necessary to pressure for a ceasefire? Also, is that Canada's stance? Does Canada want a ceasefire in the region? Next question, why hasn't the government used the free trade agreement between Canada and Israel to try to push Israel in that direction? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and absolutely we do want a ceasefire in the region, and that's why the Prime Minister, the Minister of Foreign Affairs have been so actively involved with their counterparts in the G7, with foreign ministers in the region, with prime ministers in the region, to push our desire for a ceasefire. The fighting must stop. Civilians must be protected, and we call for an immediate ceasefire. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member from Ottawa West Nepean has time for a 30-second question.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I appreciate the member calling for a ceasefire, for diplomacy, for de-escalation, but she also mentioned that we're giving $10 million in humanitarian aid immediately. I wonder if she can tell us why that's so important. Thank you.
Ooh.
Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Thank you for the question, and through you, Mr. Speaker, I would say that we're seeing the deterioration of how civilians are living in Lebanon and find it completely unacceptable. And so Canada has stepped up to provide an additional $10 million to assist those citizens with humanitarian aid, to really try to reach those individuals whose lives have been so just terribly uprooted by the conflict that's happening. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Reprise du débat, resuming debate. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of National Revenue.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And I rise today with a really heavy heart, but understanding how important it is for us to have this debate here today, for us to shed light on what is the living reality of millions of people in the Middle East. As we announced $10 million in humanitarian aid for Lebanon, as I watch our government work really hard to try to make sure that there is de-escalation, to make sure that we are finding a way forward to peace, I can't help but think about a town hall that I had held in my riding over the summer. It was a roundtable on anti-Palestinian racism. And you know, throughout the summer, I've continued to meet with Canadians of Middle Eastern descent, with Jewish descent, throughout this whole process. One thing has stood out to me. It is a fear expressed by some residents who are not Palestinian that this war would escalate and draw in other nations in the Middle East, that soon no one would be safe. And we are witnessing that escalation right now. These indiscriminate attacks against the people of Lebanon, regardless of the intent to target terrorist Hezbollah, will only bring more war and more death to the region. It will just endanger the lives of the people of Lebanon. But Netanyahu's violence is now bringing retaliatory strikes that will lead to injury and death of the people of Israel as well. Mr. Speaker, next week will mark an entire year of watching Netanyahu's campaign of violence against the people of Palestine in Gaza and the West Bank. 1 year of death and violence and famine for over 1 million innocent Palestinian people. 1 year since a raid by the terrorist group Hamas that killed over 1,000 Israeli people and took hundreds hostage, some of whom have died while others remain in captivity. What we have watched in the year since is a disproportionate, brutal, and inhumane slaughter of innocent lives. It is not a targeted strike, but collective punishment for an entire culture, for the actions of specific extremist people. And we have seen Netanyahu's regime have made it clear that they do not see any difference between a terrorist aggressor and an innocent child playing in the street. There is no difference between the terrorist and the innocent, and that all must be eliminated. This is how they spoke of Palestine, and now how they speak of Lebanon in the same way. We do not tolerate this type of behavior from any nation, and we must hold our friends to that same standard. Mr. Speaker, freedom of speech and freedom of expression and protest are protected, but we must ensure that we don't conflate fair criticism of the actions of Netanyahu and his regime in Israel to how it manifests within communities in our Canada. My constituents have told me quite frankly, Mr. Speaker, that this concept of de-escalation through escalation is nonsense. It is warmongering, plain and simple. I stood in this House 6 months ago and said that Canada is a friend to the people of Israel, but that does not mean that we must support or defend Netanyahu and his regime's horrific actions. Since then, Netanyahu has continued to slaughter Palestinians in Gaza. invaded the West Bank and settlements, and has now forged ahead another war with the people of Lebanon.
Moody SB with the $2.
Terrorist has.
You're a genius. You're a genius. Moody, I want to shake your hand. I want to give you a hug. That's genius. Justin Trudeau with a Liberal government. Hold on a second, everybody. The Liberal government, this is what Moody just said for those that didn't see the live chat. The Liberal government is now dedicating $10 million of humanitarian aid, whatever that looks like. We don't know what $10 million is going to go towards. It's not going to be $10 million worth of goods. It's not going to be $10 million worth of water and food and rations and Band-Aids. It's going to be $10 million that includes salaries, travel, airfare, logistics, contractors being paid absurd amount of money, right? To then probably give them 3 bottles of water, a couple of Band-Aids, and some gauze, right? Like that's going to be it. So that's costing taxpayers $10 million. It's not an insane amount of money, but that's a lot of money. Moody, who just gave the $2 super chat, suggested, what about Trudeau's condo for $9 million? Maybe that's even in USD. We should sell that condo to pay for this $10 million of humanitarian aid. Let me know down in the comments if you guys agree with Moody's super chat comment.
This endless cycle of violence and the attack has lasted 75 years, and it has achieved nothing. The people of Palestine still live under oppression. The people of Israel and Lebanon still live in fear of rockets and airstrikes. Extremism continues to grow and inflict terror, and we are no closer to peace in the Middle East. This way has not worked for 75 years, and it's not going to start working now. Canada has to be a voice for peace. Because this constant war, fear of attacks, and inhumane living, it needs to end. For the good of the people of Lebanon, Israel,
Moody,
Palestine,
you son of a gun.
Syria, Jordan, and all those who call the Middle East home. Mr. Speaker, as I said, I've spent the summer talking to my constituents and learning from them. And one of the biggest, most tragic moments that I have experienced is learning about immediate family members that have suffered, my constituents who have lost their loved ones to this indiscriminate punishment. They're not terrorists. They're innocent people trying to live their lives. Entire generations have been wiped out. And Mr. Speaker, I do want to share some of the emails that I've received from my constituents on this. The grief, the dismay, the anger is very real. And I think everybody in this chamber would understand that if our loved ones were going through the same, how would we feel about this? I quote, "Words are not enough to capture my sadness and disappointment when hearing about Israel's escalation in Lebanon that has already killed hundreds and injured thousands more. Through nearly a year of genocide in Gaza, we have learned that Israel does not value civilian life or infrastructure and instead wants to make its border regions unavailable for all Arab peoples." Another quote, "My concerns are amplified when I hear that Canada continues to allow weapons transfers to Israel despite its war crimes and violations of international law in both Palestine and Lebanon, as well as its assassinations in Iran. To date, Canada has only suspended 30 out of 250 active permits for weapons being shipped to Israel that come on the heels of the disturbing revelation that many Canadian companies are sneaking weapons to Israel through the U.S. There's a lot of concerns from constituents, not just from mine, but from across the country, that share their viewpoints on all sides of this. People are sharing how afraid they are of how this war is manifesting here within our communities in Canada. We are obligated as Canadian parliamentarians not just to ensure that Canadians are getting the correct information, but also to ensure that we are continuing to build bridges that we are continuing to work hard and ensure that Canada lives up to its record and its reputation of being a peacekeeper at home and abroad. We are a multicultural society, a mosaic that believes in diversity being our strength, and it is our strength. The common ground between all of us is that we are all human. It doesn't matter what religion we are part of. It doesn't matter what creed we are, what color our skin is. At the end of the day, human life is human life, whether it is in Israel or Palestine or Lebanon. And I think that we as Canadians need to do more. We need to ensure that we are continuing to build those bridges amongst Canadians and also amongst the world at large. And I'll take my last 1 minute, Mr. Speaker, as I have done over the past couple of months, to my constituents, to all Canadians who are in Lebanon right now, to please come home. It is not safe, and we are here to provide that support. I encourage those that are watching to reach out to your local members of parliament, including myself, to ensure that you understand and have the support that you need in this really difficult time that we are all facing, not just as Canadians, but as human beings all across this world. I pray for peace, Mr. Speaker. I pray for those that have been lost in this war, and I pray that we find our humanity one more time. Thank you.
Thank goodness you're done talking.
Yeah, questions and comments. The honourable member from Sherwood Park, Fort Saskatchewan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I just have a very brief question. The member who spoke is a parliamentary secretary. Can we assume that the positions she took in her speech are positions of the Government of Canada, or are the positions she took in her speech different from the positions of the Government of Canada?
The honourable member from Mississauga, Erin Mills.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I do appreciate that question. I think we as parliamentarians here in this House have an opportunity to express what our constituents express to us. We are representatives of our constituents, and the positions of our constituents are no different than the position of the Government of Canada. The Government of Canada is trying to find peace in a very difficult situation for so many different people, whether it is providing humanitarian aid in that region, whether it is trying to build relationships. We are trying to work for humanity, and I look forward to working with that member on ensuring that all Canadians...
No, there's another Conservative there. You'll see him. Michael Chong.
Then I have
Michael Chong.
The Honourable Member for Lac-Saint-Jean. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Don't worry, folks. Like I said, we got some wiggle room. All right, we got a little bit of wiggle room. Let's just skip past her, huh? Do everyone a favor, skip past her. Do everybody a favor, you know what I'm saying? Graduate from the University of Sayans. Here you go.
Since the Peace of Westphalia was concluded in 1648, the international system has developed
no more wiggle room.
Modern nation states and international law. In the almost 400 years since those treaties were established, the world has created nation states that conduct relations based on international law. And that international system further developed after 1945, a period during which Canada was instrumental in creating the current rules-based international system that has ensured our relative peace and security here at home. Our forebears here in Canada well understood the need for a rules-based system because Canada paid a high price in the Great War and in the Second World War in defense of freedom, democracy, and the rule of law. Some 60,000 Canadian soldiers died during the Great War. Some 40,000 Canadian soldiers died during the Second World War. Over 100,000 Canadian soldiers gave their lives in 2 world wars, and hundreds of thousands of more were injured physically and mentally, and came home and suffered for the duration of the rest of their lives. And as a result of that suffering, our forebears understood the need for a rules-based international system that would not only ensure the peace and security of Canadians here at home, but the peace and security of all humanity abroad. That rules-based system, which we have enjoyed for 80-some years, has given us that relative peace and security. And I want to highlight some very, very stark statistics to illustrate what I am talking about. There is no doubt that millions of people around the world today have suffered and are suffering. But Mr. Speaker, that pales in comparison to the bloodshed and the suffering before 1945. Life before 1945, for the vast majority of humanity, was nasty, brutish, and short. In the First World War, in the Great War, some 40 million people died. That's right, 40 million. In the Second World War, some 75 million people died. That scale of human misery and suffering and death has largely been avoided because of the rules-based international system that Canada was instrumental in founding in 1945. And those deaths from those two wars, that's the small part of it before 1945. They were the smallest part of the deaths before 1945. In the period before 1945, people just didn't suffer because of conflict and war. Hundreds of millions more suffered and died because of extreme poverty. 2/3 of all humanity before 1945 lived in extreme poverty. Today, it's only about 1 in 7 people on the planet live in extreme poverty. In fact, the number of people living in extreme poverty today is not only much smaller as a proportion of the planet's humanity, but it is smaller in absolute numbers of people suffering prior to 1945. Despite the massive growth, the trebling, quadrupling of the world's population in the last half century and more. The rules-based international system for trade and investment has significantly reduced that suffering and increased prosperity. It's that rules-based system that has led to a huge drop in extreme poverty and a massive increase in prosperity for peoples around the world. It is the rules-based system that has led to a significant drop from deaths and suffering from war. It is a system that states like the People's Republic of China, the Russian Federation, and the Islamic Republic of Iran want to dismantle. They do not want this system, and they have been very explicit about this in their speeches and in their declarations. And they would rather us revert to a pre-1945 world where power determines relations between states. And none of us, Mr. Speaker, should want to return to that world. An essential part of the international rules-based system is international humanitarian law, otherwise known as the law of armed conflict. International humanitarian law is the heart of what we are debating tonight in this House. It is whether or not actors in the conflict in the Middle East today are acting in accordance with international humanitarian law, acting in accordance with the law of armed conflict. Under international humanitarian law, states have the right to defend themselves. On October 7th of last year, a liberal democratic state was attacked. It was attacked by Hamas. On that day, 2,500 Hamas terrorists invaded a sovereign state, breaking through the sovereign 1949 armistice border and killing over 1,100 innocent civilians. It must be repeated that these 1,100 civilians were not killed inadvertently, were not killed accidentally. These 1,100 civilians weren't killed incidental to the targeting of armed combatants or military objectives. These innocent civilians were the target. These 1,100 innocent civilians were deliberately and systemically targeted and murdered by Hamas. in what constituted a massive war crime. They were gunned down execution style, just like the mobile killing squads of the Nazis, the Einsatzkommando, who executed some 1.5 million Jews during the Action campaign in 1941 in Eastern Europe. On October 7th last year, whole families were executed. Innocent babies were killed in their cribs, and the dead were mutilated. Some of the dead were paraded through the streets of Gaza. There were Canadians amongst those deliberately killed, and there were Canadians amongst those deliberately taken hostage. And since Hamas began its attack on Israel last October 7th, Hezbollah and the Islamic Republic of Iran have joined in. Hezbollah has launched some 8,000 rockets at Israel over the last 12 months, forcing the displacement of some 60,000 civilians from the north of Israel to the south, essentially making northern Israel a vacant zone for civilians. These civilians have had to leave their homes and their communities, and the government of the State of Israel has had to evacuate them out of Israeli territory to the south. And today, Iran launched yet another attack on the State of Israel by launching some 200 ballistic missiles. Mr. Speaker, all states have a responsibility to defend their citizens and to defend their territory. The State of Israel is no different. Israel is at war. This is a legal war under international humanitarian law. The war the State of Israel is conducting against Hamas, against Hezbollah,
it's different than Ukraine and Russia because it's a legal war.
Iran under international humanitarian law is a justifiable war. It is a justifiable war against two terrorist groups and a state that sponsors terrorism. Israel has the right to prosecute this war under international humanitarian law and to prosecute this war to its conclusion that the State of Israel has so determined, and ensure that Hamas, Hezbollah, and the Islamic Republic of Iran no longer threaten the citizens of its state or its territory. Canada did the same thing during the Second World War. We defended our citizens and our territories against a hostile threat. And the State of Israel has the right to do the same. Mr. Speaker, millions of civilians are suffering because of the war in Gaza, in Lebanon, and in Israel. And we mourn the loss of innocent civilians, particularly women and children. The combatants in this conflict need to ensure that they distinguish between combatants and civilians and take all feasible precaution in the targeting of military objectives to minimize harm to civilians and civilian objects. But ultimately, the solution to the conflict and the war in the Middle East is for Hezbollah and Hamas to lay down their arms to protect innocent Lebanese and Palestinians that for too long have been subject to these brutal terrorist entities for decades. For too long, civilians, Palestinians, Lebanese, Syrians, Iranians, have been the victims of Hamas, Hezbollah, and the Islamic regime in Iran. For too long, these regimes have suppressed democracy, human rights and freedoms, and the rule of law through brute force. For too long, millions of Palestinians, Lebanese, Syrians, and Iranians have suffered. If there's any ray of hope in recent events, it is that they mark the end of the terrorist groups Hamas and Hezbollah, and the beginning of the end of the Islamic Republic of Iran's hold on much of the region. Canada is a Western liberal democracy. What is going on in the Middle East is a clash between a rising authoritarianism backed by states such as the People's Republic of China, the Russian Federation, and the Islamic Republic of Iran, and democracies such as Taiwan, Ukraine, and the State of Israel. And in that clash between a rising authoritarianism and democracies, there is no question on which side of the line Canada should stand. Canada must stand for democracy. Canada must stand for human rights and freedoms. And Canada must stand for the rule of law as it is articulated in international humanitarian law. Conservatives support the State of Israel. The State of Israel is a liberal, democratic state. It is also the homeland of the Jewish people. It has the right to defend itself. It has the right to use all legal means necessary under international humanitarian law to ensure its peace and security. Israel, like Ukraine and Taiwan, is at the front lines of a clash that is unfolding before our eyes, a clash that we did not anticipate a decade ago, a clash that has unfolded over the last several years. In that rising clash between two very different models of governance, there is no doubt where Canada's interests and where Canada's values lie. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
I can't wrap my head around the fact that we have opposing views within our government officials. You have party leaders, right? You have Pierre stands with Israel. Yes, it's live. You have Trudeau stands with Israel, but also supports sending money and humanitarian aid to Lebanon and Palestine and Gaza. Then you have Jagmeet, who's just like this weirdo who literally opposes everything. Everything. Even if Trudeau and Pierre say, you know what, it's time to take a right turn, no matter what, without even knowing where the destination is or where they're driving or on what road they're at, Jagmeet will blindly say, no, it's time to take a left turn. It's so weird. It's so weird. If we just look at objectively our allied countries, Israel's an allied country. Lebanon is not. We send troops there. Sure, we've done humanitarian aid in the past, but they just bombed each other. Like, what the hell? This is so freaking weird. Like, you got people in government representing Canada saying we support Israel to bomb, through defense because it's a legal war, right? That we support them to bomb Lebanon, and then freaking Jagmeet's going, no, we support Lebanon bombing Israel. Like, what the hell's going on? I don't get it. I don't get why our country's so, like, our government is so divided on this. Like, just pick one and go with it. The division in the government trickles down and it divides the country. Like, it's so weird, man. Jagmeet will blindly, whatever Pierre says, he's going the other way. Whatever Trudeau says, he's going the other way. And if Pierre and Trudeau agree on something, miraculously, Jagmeet says, no, we're going backwards. Screw that. I'm not going that way. Oh my God. I don't get it. I don't get it. And look, I seen a couple comments today in the live chat on X saying, "Are you a shill for Zionist?" What the hell does that even mean? What the hell? I know some Jewish people. I know Israel is an ally, and that's pretty much the extent of what I know. I'm not supporting either one, bombing either one, dude. Nobody's supporting this war, but we're allies with other countries, right? And that's where it's a little different. Yeah, it's so weird.
Questions and comments. The Honourable Member for Saint-Hyacinthe-Bagotte. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I listened attentively to my colleague's speech. I think there are several things, but there was a historical portion that could be subject to debate if we talk about this global order that was built.
What about our defenses? Yeah, man. That's another thing. We're going to skip Quebec guy here. That's another thing too. Like, why isn't Canada taking that money and increasing our defenses? We are so vulnerable. We have the lowest rate of people signing up for the military and the highest overturn rate of people joining the military. They stay in, they don't even finish basic training, they don't even go to their trades to do, their trade courses. Like, it's just ridiculous what's going on, man. It's ridiculous. And then our Arctic is completely vulnerable. Like, for all we know, you could, and I've theorized this a little bit, right? I theorized this. How could a country use a nuclear weapon that has the biggest, impact in terms of rise tensions, but the least amount of casualties. And I've had this conversation just theorizing different ways. And I know that it's easy to have a bias of, well, of course it's going to target Canada because we live here. But seriously, you could have a Russian submarine off of our northern coast, right? And they could launch a nuclear warhead that is way less distance than from motherland Russia over to Canada. They could hit one of our Arctic bases. I think it's alert, right? At any given time, there's like 2 or 3 dozen people that are there. Like it's very unpopulated. It sends the biggest FU to Canada, to NATO, with the least amount of casualties. And as per international law, the rules of engagement for war, you can't really exceed, and if you do, it can't be by a lot. You can go like 5-10% excess damage than what was issued to you. So this war with Israel and Lebanon, you're going to see slight increments of well, now it's not just Lebanon, it's Iran. You're going to see slight increments of, okay, we just saw insane amount of damage done to Israel, and now they're going to up the ante and go 10-15% above that and increase it until eventually we relive what happened many, many years ago with some form of nuclear weapon that's dropped. But if we shift away a little bit from what's happening in the Middle East and we talk about just the nuclear, theory of like, hey, when's it going to happen? Who's it going to happen to? Who's going to launch it? Right? I think that Russia hitting Canada in the Arctic, and I'm pretty sure it's alert base, alert whatever, right? It's way, way, way up there. That would have the biggest FU to NATO, to the world, the least amount of casualties, and the most amount of rise tensions. But let me know some of your guys' theories down below here. I know it's a bit of a tangent off of what they're currently debating, but that's just where I see it kind of going, right? Because Russia is getting involved, right? Like Russia said to Israel or to America, don't interfere with Iran and Israel. So don't give them ideas. Hey, whoa. All right, Mace, chill out. That obviously wasn't the intention. And second of all, yeah, I'm sure if it did happen, I'd have some Suburbans pulling up in the front of my house going, we need to have a word with you. Yeah, no, look, I think that's one of the outcomes, right? That's one of the unfortunate outcomes. It's kind of crazy. Why am I worried about Russia? Where have you been? Why aren't you worried about Russia? What the hell?
Wellington, Halton Hills.
See, Monsieur.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to thank my colleague, my honourable colleague, for his question. Canada is a democracy, of course, but at the same time, we're not perfect. We have a lot of problems here. And it's the same thing with other democracies worldwide, such as the case with Israel. It's not a perfect democracy. There are problems domestically, but it's not up to us to pronounce our opinions about problems in other democracies. There are problems in North America and the South, but it's not up to Canada to give its opinions on problems in the U.S. In my opinion, we are clearly a liberal democracy that is based on Western values, and it's the same thing with Israel, and we must support this state because it is. Sorry, I would ask the honourable member to wrap up his answer quickly. Quickly, please. Because there is a big war between democracies and authoritarian states. I'd like to thank the member for Wellington, Halton Hills. And I just remind all members, when you're going to answer your question, please adjust. Look at me and I will tell you how much time you have, so make sure you don't go over. The honourable member for Edmonton, Strathcona.
For his intervention, I find it shocking that he wasn't able to find even one example of how Netanyahu's administration could be criticized. But, I'm interested. He talked about international law. He talked about rule-based international systems. Clearly, he would know that almost every single international expert has said that the actions of this Netanyahu government have reduced the rules-based international order. So I'd like him to tell me very clearly, what is the Conservative Party's position in terms of international justice? Would a Conservative government support the ICC and ICJ calls for justice that we've seen come through?
The honourable member from Wellington, Halton Hills.
Mr. Speaker, I want to thank my honourable colleague for her question. I disagree with the premise of her question. I've seen no credible reports that indicate that the State of Israel has contravened international humanitarian law. I've also seen no credible reports that the State of Israel has violated customary international law.
I'm going to ask the honourable member from Edmonton Strathcona to please to hold her time until she has an opportunity to speak when she's recognized. And I insist this for all members. I think all members, this is a very sensitive issue, and I congratulate all members for being very patient with each other as we explore a very sensitive issue. The honourable member from Wellington, Halton Hills.
Mr. Speaker, I've seen no credible reports of State of Israel violating either international humanitarian law or customary international law. The number of civilians that have been unfortunately killed in this conflict is not an arbitrary determinant as to whether or not a state is complying with international law. I remind this House that the Allies during the Second World War killed 400,000 German civilians, and that was not a war crime. Those were incidental to the targeting of military objectives. And I remind this House, Mr. Speaker, that the Luftwaffe killed 40,000 Londoners during the Second World War. And every one of those deaths, Mr. Speaker, was a war crime because the Luftwaffe deliberately targeted the civilian areas of East London and not military objectives. So, Mr. Speaker, the number of civilian deaths, however unfortunate, is not the determinant as to whether or not international humanitarian law has been breached.
The honourable member from Winnipeg South Centre.
Thanks very much, Mr. Speaker. I listened as a former history teacher with great interest to the remarks from my colleague across the way. I actually want to shift for a moment, Mr. Speaker, to what's happening here domestically by virtue of what's happening overseas. I'm wondering if my colleague can comment on some of the trends that we have seen here in Canada whereby by virtue of the way that one feels about the current government of the State of Israel, there have been substantial implications for Jews, such as myself and those I represent across Canada. Can he speak, for example, to some of the calls for boycotting of so-called Zionist businesses and how he believes that this is a problem for us here in Canada as we try in our diaspora communities to deal with the impacts of what's happening overseas? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member from Wellington Halton Hills.
I'd like to thank my honourable colleague for the question. I think the federal government should show leadership in tackling the heinous rise in anti-Semitism in our country, in tackling the disorder in our public spaces and in our streets that are targeting Jews, that are targeting synagogues, and that are targeting Jewish institutions such as schools. And I believe that the public safety minister should convene a federal provincial solicitors general meeting in order to come to an agreement amongst the 10 provinces and the federal government that directives will be issued of general application to law enforcement in this country, that laws will be enforced against those that would use public disorder in our streets to target the Jewish community. And that's the kind of leadership that I would expect from a government of Canada, leadership that I am convinced will be in place if Conservatives form the next government.
The honourable member from Kitchener Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to start by sharing how much I agree with the member for Wellington Halton Hills on the importance of the rules-based order. Appreciate his focus on international humanitarian law. Agree with him on condemning Hamas for their terrorist attack of October the 7th. But my question to him is about all parties following international humanitarian law. He was looking for examples earlier. I'll cite with him some here. Amnesty International, January 2019, quote, Israel's policy of settling its civilians in occupied Palestinian territory and displacing the local population contravenes fundamental rules of international humanitarian law. That was prior to October 7th. If he's looking for post-October 7th, January 26th, the International Court of Justice ordered Israel to take actions, 6, to prevent acts of genocide. Clearly, we would agree that's against international humanitarian law. Is he going to call for international humanitarian law to be followed by all parties or only some?
The honourable member from Wellington Halton Hills.
Mr. Speaker, first, I want to thank the member for the question. Second, the International Court of Justice did not find that Israel had committed genocide. It just asked the State of Israel to comply with the 1948 Genocide Convention, which Israel is in the process, Israel has been doing. Secondly, with respect to Amnesty International's interpretation of international humanitarian law, I disagree, and with their interpretation of the facts on the ground. At the end of the day, there have been no credible reports that I have read that indicate that the State of Israel has committed war crimes or has had grave breaches of customary international law. What I do know is that the terrorist group Hamas, in taking the hostages, some 250 hostages last October 7th, did commit war crimes. That is obviously a war crime. The Hamas, in executing and targeting some 1,100 innocent civilians, also committed war crimes. Those are findings that I think the international community has agreed to, that adhere to Hamas, and for which they should be held responsible.
Well done.
No. A very brief question and a very brief answer from the member from Thornhill.
Mr. Speaker, I want to know the member's thoughts on the very idea that this government, who just reaffirmed its commitment to funding UNRWA, had the leader of Hamas in Lebanon, who was an UNRWA school teacher, just buried in Hamas regalia today. What does he think of that?
The honourable member from Halton Hills has 20 seconds to respond.
Mr. Speaker, I think the Government of Canada should suspend immediately all funding to UNRWA. I think it's clear that UNRWA has a problem with certain number of employees that are supporters of Hamas and Hezbollah, that UNRWA has a problem with some of its facilities being used as staging grounds for terrorist activities, and that's why the Government of Canada should immediately suspend funding.
Wow.
Resuming debate, the honourable member for Saint-Jean.
Wow.
Thank you.
So you've got people that disagree on whether we stand with Israel. Some people like the NDP stand with Lebanon, and then you have those that stand with Israel. The Conservatives are calling to not send money, stop the funding to these other countries like Lebanon and Hamas or Gaza or Palestine, whatever it's called, right? That's crazy. We're going to skip it. I said we got a little bit of wiggle room left. We got a little bit of wiggle room. It might actually be done. It might be done, folks. No, it's not done. We still got some time. I saw Garnett here.
Human rights, and we were having hearings on the terrible situation in Sudan. Now, the connection between those events and these events, and frankly, much of the violence we see around the world, is the role being played by the Iranian regime, seeking to expand its control. It is now terrorizing the people of Lebanon through Hezbollah, of Palestine through the Palestinian territories through Hamas. It is terrorizing the people of Iran through its continuing control of Iran. It's present in Iraq, in Yemen, and many other places. We should have acted much earlier. Does member support listing the IRGC, and why wasn't that action taken earlier?
I hope we caught that. Thank you for trying to respect the time. Let us have
the honourable member elect Saint-Jean. Just Saint-Jean. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Unfortunately, I was not at the committee with my colleague from Fort Saskatchewan, but we heard similar things at the Defence Committee about situations around the world. The conflict is taking on a regional scale. Iran has tentacles in all sorts of places, even Ukraine. It's wrong to look at the influence of Iran through the lens of a two-country conflict. It has a large influence, a large and complex influence, and our response has to be very broad in general. As a Quebecer, I'm sorry, I do know the difference between Saint-Jean and Lac-Saint-Jean. Now over to the member for Lac-Saint-Jean.
I know some folks are going to want to skip the French version here.
Was this for a question, or are you giving me the floor for a speech?
We'll skip forward. Brennan Taylor says, House Canada, your next career move needs to be House Speaker. Dude, I would be the most unprofessional House Speaker. Come on. I just answered a comment on X where someone said we need you in Parliament. And I said, there's no way in hell. I don't wear suits. I don't even know if I have a suit that fits. I don't even know. And I wear flip-flops 9 months out of the year. Yes, I wear it in snow. Why? Because I want to, because I can. I used to live in a van. I'm a hippie. There's no way that, how much time is left? There's Garnett.
Of specificity.
It's almost done, folks. There's only a few minutes left.
Responses or explanations from some members. I understand the desire of people to express a hope for peace, a desire for greater collaboration and goodwill, but the way we operationalize that is through specific suggestions. So members talk about a right to Israel having a right to defend itself, about wanting to have peace, hold terrorist groups accountable, but they're not willing to specify exactly the mechanics of that. What does it mean for Israel to have a right to defend itself, for example, in practice?
The honourable member from Brampton Centre has 20 seconds to reply.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Israel has right to exist and defend itself. At the same time, Israel has to live with its neighbors with the peace and let them live with the dignity and peace. Israel has no right to violate international law and humanitarian law.
Reprise du débat.
Resuming debate.
The honourable member from Thornhill.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. News broke today of another terrorist attack in Tel Aviv. More than 200 missiles launched into Israel from Iran, with sirens sounding in Tel Aviv and Jerusalem, in every major city across the country, as nearly an entire population took shelter in place. There is no better time than tonight to talk about the brutality of the Iranian regime, the most destabilizing force of evil in a region, and the puppet masters for the proxy armies who have wreaked havoc on millions of innocent people in Gaza, in Lebanon, in Iran, and of course in Israel. The attack appears far bigger than the last one in April, and it should be the clearest of indications that Western values, that peace and security, that the stability of the entire region are all at risk because of the fundamentalists that have for a generation taken Iran back into the Stone Ages. And over the last number of weeks, they were deeply wounded, they were humiliated, and they were finally weakened. And it should have been very simple to state unequivocally that Israel, especially on a day where millions were forced into shelters and innocent civilians were killed in a terrorist attack, that it had the right, the duty, and the responsibility to defend itself. It should be easy to unequivocally state that this country should fight to eradicate terror. And instead, we got this from a foreign minister who's not just naive about terror, but outside of her depth on almost every conversation since and before October 7th. And quite frankly, it's humiliating for her, and it's humiliating for the entire country. So instead of a comment on fighting terror, her words were the following. I'm going to quote, "The attacks from Iran will only serve to further escalate the region, and therefore that is why I've been in contact with my Israeli counterpart this morning, and I have been in contact with G7 foreign ministers, as well as Arab countries' foreign ministers. This is a very dangerous time for the Middle East, and we need to make sure that the war stops." That was her quote. She went on to tell reporters outside of this place quote, I need to make sure that there's no escalation, of course. Israel needs to be able to protect itself, and that's what we will continue to support, its security, and will support, of course, through the Iron Dome. She continued her quote, at the same time, we need to make sure that parties sit down and the war stops, because we can see what will happen. There will be even further escalation, more further innocent civilians, including women and children, die, and that's what I said at the UN yesterday, and we need the war to stop, end quote. So if we are to understand this, the minister's position now is that Israel can intercept hundreds of incoming ballistic missiles from Iran, but that's exactly where the defense stops. Israel just needs to accept that these attacks happen and that their technological superiority can continue to provide 100% coverage. Unconcerned with the terror of Hamas and Hezbollah and the mullahs in Iran, and only capable of repeating these talking points, they've received high praise from some in her caucus. They've received confusion from others, embarrassment from some. And they were thanked. This minister was thanked by Hamas, a terrorist organization that this country was once unequivocal about wanting to defeat. We went on to talk again about a ceasefire on the day of a major escalation from Tehran. And as for her calls for the supposed 21-day ceasefire, the G7 and some Arab countries were touting last week, it is worthwhile to remember, because nobody has said it in this House, that ceasefire negotiation didn't include any of the belligerent actors involved in this. The ones responsible for the ongoing terror attacks, they themselves were not in the ceasefire talks. So it was a ceasefire proposal that didn't involve anyone who was actually fighting. This is the minister who at the UN managed to offend even our most ardent allies in Canada with her inconsistent hum of moral equivalency, her incomprehensible message, and the very fact that Canada at the highest levels speaks from both sides of its mouth. It is the same minister who, alongside the Minister for Mental Health and the member from York Centre, was proudly photographed caressing the hand of a prolific terrorist and a Holocaust denier in the 19th year of his 4-year mandate, who set up a martyr fund to reward those who killed Jews. The member from York Centre demanded an apology from members of this House, and I will tell you, Mr. Speaker, she will never get an apology from any member of this House on this side for pointing to her dangerous, sanctimonious hypocrisy as she poses for pictures with terrorists instead of denouncing terror. I think her constituents actually deserve the apology, and I am almost certain that there is no apology that will ever convince anyone from her riding to make her a member of Parliament again. Yes. The Prime Minister came to Jewish communities after October 7th. We are almost a year from that date. He and members of the Liberal Party stood tall and promised full support. He gave them their word. But what have we seen since? We've seen protests targeting innocent people in Jewish neighborhoods, Jewish businesses, Jewish places of worship. They're not protesting Israel. They're not protesting the government of Israel. They're not even protesting MP offices. They are intimidating Jews, complete with anti-Semitic slogans, with flags, with chants, with banners in neighborhoods, in front of synagogues, in front of a senior's home right here in the nation's capital just last week, with silence from the MP. We've seen new lows in cancel culture as Israeli authors and artists themselves are deplatformed, as universities call for ideological purity to promote Hamas talking points, as IDF veterans are shamed, and as the leader of one of Ontario's largest unions gets to keep his job while celebrating, quote, resistance in the Middle East. We all know what that means. His watermelon army of radicals enjoys impunity of the worst anti-Semitism that I have seen in my lifetime in any labor movement. And we have seen unprecedented acts of physical violence too, at synagogues, at schools in Toronto, synagogues and schools in Montreal, cities from coast to coast like Vancouver to Fredericton. It goes beyond graffiti that we have all unfortunately gotten used to. It turned into firebombs. It turned into bricks through buildings. It turned into actual gunshots from actual guns. But where has the Prime Minister gone? As the headlines pile up, one after another, as stories get more and more outrageous, nothing except silence, and maybe, if we're lucky, the weakest of platitudes trying to say something and nothing at all. All while anti-Semitic hate crimes doubled in less than a year. It's 2024, they are up by 250%. All while the Jewish community suffered 70% of all religious-based hate crimes, despite making up less than 2% of the population. The Prime Minister is nowhere to be found. His Foreign Minister can't muster a coherent thought. His ministers are terrified of even giving the most basic condemnation. That's on him. He and his government lack the courage to speak out unequivocally and denounce what is happening right now. And the lack of courage to take new measures to protect our country by truly banning the IRGC agents whom are still here, Samidoun, and even properly vetting those who have been caught right before they committed a terrorist attack, either right here in our country's biggest city or south of the border in New York. The government awarded a citizenship to someone that they arrested on terror charges. They lack the courage to do just the bare minimum, and enforcing the laws in our criminal code. All while they deny security funding to the most vulnerable synagogues or community centers with excuses of red tape or frankly incompetence. We've known for a long time that the Prime Minister's and his MP lack any conviction at all. But never has this lack of conviction been more costly and put more people at risk than right now. He's playing politics because he's out of gas on everything else. He's playing politics with the gravest threat in the Middle East's security in a generation. And he's playing politics with the biggest challenge to Canadian religious freedoms since the Holocaust. And let me tell you how he does it. He sends one group of MPs to say one thing to one community.
Yeah.
He sends another group of MPs to say another thing to the other community. He gets members like the one from Mount Royal and Eglinton Lawrence to put out strongly worded tweets to say all of the right things to try and cover up the failures at the top while being shoved in the back corner of Parliament. Meanwhile, members like the one from Scarborough Centre call for a, quote, unequivocal embargo and actively parrot anti-Israel talking points. Two different MPs, two different messages to two different communities. He sends ministers to denounce UNRWA and announce that they stopped Canadian funding. But then they quietly resume funding just months later with millions of tax dollars. They can't even take a stand to condemn the immunity for UNRWA employees that participated in literal terrorism. And let's not forget their impeccable timing to reaffirm their unwavering support for UNRWA, just as UNRWA publicly admitted that Fatih al-Sharif, Hamas leader in Lebanon, was also running an UNRWA school and heading their school union. He was just buried in Hamas regalia, in case anyone missed it. And at what point does the Liberal government move UNRWA from the willful ignorance column to the willing co-conspirator column and stop sending Canadian tax dollars that is funding terror? They are doing so because they lack the courage. Like I said, they lack the conviction to do what's right instead of do what's popular. They lack the fortitude to stand with our allies through fire and through water instead of just freeloading as usual. And they lack the moral clarity to stand with the Jewish community, not just when it's easy, but also when it's difficult. There is a steep price to pay for this, Mr. Speaker, for our reputation abroad as it continues to crumble in the face of another equivocation, in the face of another reversal, in the face of another backtrack. We once were the country that took Juno Beach, that served in Korea, that brought peace to countless nations. We were the country now that can't even honor its basic commitments, Send a foreign minister who has a basic understanding of the threats in the region to any podium where those in the audience aren't questioning her own capacity and the words coming out of her own mouth. It is a steep price to pay for those living in the Middle East as they continue to live under the thumb of oppressive regimes like Hamas and like Hezbollah, as they continue to wait for their loved ones to come home, and as they continue to yearn for peace and freedom. But it's also a steep price to pay for the people living here in Canada. And it hasn't been this hard to be a Jewish Canadian for a very long time. How couldn't it be when you can't hang a mezuzah on your door at your home or at your university dorm, and frankly, in almost every Jewish neighborhood that's happening? How couldn't it be when you can't wear a kippah without being followed or verbally harassed or even spat on in this country? How couldn't it be when you go to synagogue and you find out again that it's been vandalized? And how couldn't it be when you send your kids to a Jewish school and you can't trust that they are going to come home at the end of the day? But these are not just attacks against the Jewish community, they are attacks against everyone. And when the inherent rights of religious freedom, of speech, of assembly, or just plain dignity are denied to one group, it is very easy for people to deny them to another group. And when we turn a blind eye to injustice happening here at home, they persist, and it gets worse. My parents came to this country for freedom, and I am so glad that they did, and millions of others came to this country for freedom. But I wonder if they saw the anti-Semitism here today, that they would make that same decision. Because it's been taking place in this country for far too long. And it's not hyperbole, it's a real thing that's happening. And the other side better wake up. The emails I get from constituents telling me, I want to stay in Canada, but I don't know if I can anymore. They tell me that freedom, the very essence of our country, is in great peril, and they're actually scared in 2024 as Jews in this country. And when we lose that, Mr. Speaker, we lose something much bigger than ourselves. It's not too late to get it back, but it's going to take far more effort than the window dressing and the posturing that this government put forward so far. But since the members of the NDP have become unrecognizable in their pursuit of division in this country and lack the respect for Western democratic values, unable to muster even the courage to stand on the side of allies, brought a request to discuss the carnage in Lebanon with barely a mention of Hezbollah. Let's go through a timeline so they can join us here in the real world. October 7th, that's Hamas's attack on Israel, the worst attack on the Jewish people since the Holocaust. Hezbollah immediately escalated that aggression, launching more than 9,000 missiles, rockets, and drones on northern Israel. It has been evacuated for the better part of a year. After doing the bidding of these terrorists, July 27, 2024, an attack on Druze children by Hezbollah occurred in the northern Golan Heights. A rocket fired by Hezbollah struck a soccer field where children were playing. They killed 12 children, teenagers. They injured dozens more. So now, in response to these attacks, Israel has launched the largest military campaign against Hezbollah since 2006. The operation targets Hezbollah's military infrastructure, aiming to significantly degrade the group's capabilities. And we used to be on the side of fighting terrorism. And in this part of the House, we still are.
Yeah.
And that brings us to the elimination of one of the most prolific terrorists that ever was, ending a 30-year reign of terror when he dragged his country into one war after another, indiscriminate in his terror, Israelis, Americans, the death of thousands of Lebanese, of Syrians during his bloody rule, and he enjoyed very little support from his Arab neighbors and the Arab League and the US and the EU and Canada, who designated him a terrorist, his group a terrorist. So to watch these flags fly in the streets without a peep from anybody in this House is frankly unforgivable. To watch members of this House stand in rallies alongside Hezbollah flags is unforgivable. No one wants to see the loss of life, Mr. Speaker. It's why we're here talking about this anywhere. But it must be said in this debate that the rulers of Hamas, of Hezbollah, and the tyrants in Tehran are the cornerstone of suffering, and they must come to an end. The people of Lebanon, the people suffering in Gaza, the hostages still in the grips of the barbaric terror, the brave Iranian people who have taken to the streets to weaken their regime, they should be the people that we seek to fight for. This regime is responsible for stoning women in soccer fields, for throwing gay people off of roofs, and to watch members of parliament line up at rallies where they are flying their flag, again, Mr. Speaker, is frankly unforgivable. We shouldn't be a focus on appeasing the tyrants, not here and not anywhere, the dictators, the murderers, the forces of hatred in power in the Middle East. We shouldn't be worried about placating the violent, spiteful mob. But that is what this country has become. And that is what we are doing right now. And Mr. Speaker, it is a shame, and it will change the day we elect the member from Carleton as the next Prime Minister of this country.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
Question et commentaire.
Questions.
What in the world was that, man? Okay, for those in the chat, drop some W's or something. That was insane. Canada used to stand against terrorism, and on that side of the house, on the blue side of the house, they still stand against terrorism. But Justin Trudeau, the radical left, the radical NDP, which is unrecognizable, when she said that, man, that hit home. Like no one has ever seen this. What's happening right now is crazy. It's not just that we don't agree with them. It's so radical. So radical. Darth says, don't talk through this one. Darth, I didn't talk through that one. Drop some W's for me keeping my fucking mouth shut, huh? Holy smokes, man. Wow. Oh, that was so hard for me not to talk through that. Not to say that. Wow, that was, I don't want to take the thunder away, but whoo-wee, that was incredible. That was incredible. No ums and ahs. You notice that too? No ums and ahs, no hiccups. She had her notes down below and she just went off. Man, if you're feeling so politically defeated right now, if you're just looking for who the hell do we trust with our government, our policies moving forward? Are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? That was so inspiring. That's better than any liberal, or I'm just going to keep it paused on her right there. That's better than any liberal or NDP speech that they've ever done, man. That was incredible. Joe Uber with the $50. Dude, what's going on, man? Relax. It's okay. It's okay. You don't have to donate, but thank you. With the $50. Someone asked why Trudeau has someone on his security detail whose father worked side by side with Saddam Hussein as Saddam Hussein's personal pilot. Oh my goodness. Also, the CAF, the Canadian Armed Forces, is currently sending out emails for people to put their name in for Operation Globe in Lebanon. I feel like that's some inside information. Holy smokes. That's crazy. That's crazy. Why are we doing this? Why are we going to those wars? We should be standing against that terrorism. Against. Thank you for that $50. Holy smokes. Wow. Melissa, she's just shocked. Empty stage. Look, nobody's in Parliament right now. There's like 6 people. All right. We got like 1,000 times. Right? How many people that are watching the stream? 1,000 times how many people in Parliament. That's okay. We're going to get eyes on, right? Thanks to you. Thanks to you guys liking the stream. We're almost at 1,000 likes on this stream. We almost hit 115,000 subscribers, I believe. We're going to get more people to watch this.
As the next Prime Minister of this country.
Yeah.
Damn.
Member for Thornhill can have her own version of the truth, but she can't change the truth. And earlier tonight, she tweeted something that took a clip out of what the Minister of Foreign Affairs had said at a press conference and cut it off at only a few seconds. It was a shameful act of misinformation and disinformation. The minister did call for de-escalation in this situation, as Canadians have all called called for, but she also said, and immediately thereafter, and I quote, "We support Israel's right to protect itself against these attacks." Why did she cut that part to try to foster division in this country when we're supposed to heal this country?
The honourable member from Thornhill.
Mr. Speaker, there is not one person on that side of the House that can explain to me what they mean by Israel's self-defense. What does it mean when they say Israel can defend itself? This is the same party that has cut off military aid to Israel and military aid. Come on, Mr. Speaker. He had his turn. Cut off military aid to the Iron Dome. So does it stop there? Does Israel get to defend itself in using the Iron Dome and it stops there? The foreign minister can't answer that question. Nobody on the other side can answer that question. And as soon as they do, I'm sure Canadians can know the truth.
Wait, what? We cut off funding to the Iron Dome for Israel? What? I had no idea about this.
Again, I'd like to remind all members not to take the floor until they are recognized to do so. It is a way so that we can ensure that we have a maximum participation by members and also have pointed, passionate, but in the end, parliamentary debates. L'honorable député de...
The Honourable Member for Saint-Hyacinthe-Bagot. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I listened attentively to the speech by my colleague. I think we're all on the same page. I don't think anyone wants to show solidarity with dictators. On the contrary. And yet, despite this, I have difficulty understanding how, when a Conservative government gets in, things will change. We want to stand in solidarity with the people. Back in the day, the U.S. government was ruled by neoconservatives, led by George W. Bush. They wanted to install democracy around the world by force, and it led to catastrophic results in Iraq. So what does my honourable colleague propose concretely?
The people in the region, the people of Lebanon, the people of Syria, those who have taken to the streets in Iran, not only for the last 2 years since the death of Mahsa Amini, but for the last 45 as the fundamentalists have ruined that country and taken them back in the Stone Ages, they're the ones who want change. And to watch members of this House, to watch members of the government apologize for the tyrants and the terrorists and the murderers is frankly beyond this country. And it's shocking.
The honourable member from Edmonton Strathcona.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the member's speech referred to an awful lot of the anti-Semitism we are seeing across this country, and that is undoubtedly true, and it is something that I think every member of this House is appalled by, and we should be doing.
No, you're not. But that's the thing. You're not appalled by it. The NDP, your leader, just stood up like an hour ago and said, we stand with Lebanon with their right to defend themselves. Are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? Come on.
Doing everything we can to limit all anti-Semitism, anti-Palestinian racism, anti-Islamophobia, all sorts of the discrimination that we are seeing increase exponentially right now. However, I have to say, I was in this House when a member of the Conservative Party used Hezbollah slurs, talked of pagers when addressing an Israeli-Canadian member of Parliament. If that isn't anti-Semitism, if that's appalling behavior from the Conservative Party, I wonder if this member would find that appropriate if that had been directed at another member of this House of Commons.
What the fuck are you talking about?
Speaker, talked about the anti-Semitism. We've talked about the attacks on churches, on mosques, on gurdwaras. We talk about in this House that it doesn't matter when you came to this country, what language you speak, what color your skin is. There is no room for this. There is no room for the hatred. And we want that application to ensure that Jews are part of that that the Jews are part of that story. The Jews are part of that denunciation of hate. And so far, we've seen none of that from the government and none of that from anywhere else. And you don't have to ask me. I represent one of the largest Jewish constituencies, but I've become a voice for the many in this country that email me every single day terrified of living in this country. And it's because the actions of this government and the coalition partner that are driving division in this country that is happening.
Questions and comments.
Okay, hold on a second. She was mad that somebody made a comment about pagers because the IDF intercepted a shipment of pagers that were going into Lebanon, and then they put like explosive powder on it or something and then hacked them all. What? Why is she empathizing with terrorists? What the hell is wrong with the NDP? I don't get it.
Thank God. Thank you, Madam Speaker. The honourable member from Thornhill is among the fairest of voices in the Jewish communities. After hundreds of ballistic missiles terrorized millions of Israelis today, how has this impacted Jewish life in Canada? For Thornhill.
Madam Speaker, I think the impacts were clearly laid out in my speech. And as we approach the anniversary of October 7th, I think you will hear from a chorus of voices, Jewish and non-Jewish, who cannot believe what has happened in their country. Canadians who love this country but don't recognize it anymore. And it is because of the divisive rhetoric and the tens of positions that this government has taken, saying one thing to one community and another thing to another, that this is actually happening.
The honourable member for Lac Saint Jean. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I have a lot of respect for my Conservative colleague.
Yeah, it's all right, folks. We'll skip that. We'll skip the French. We're almost out of wiggle room.
Member for Thornhill.
As the government indicated, that those who are in Lebanon, Canadian citizens, should seek an immediate way out. But I'm not sure that you've heard any solutions from the government beyond that. But I suspect the member can ask the government when they have their next round of speeches.
Questions and comments. Questions et commentaires. The honourable member, l'honorable député de Lac.
The honourable member for Lac Saint Jean.
Yeah, it's all right, man. We'll skip that again, folks. I gotcha.
Ask whether my colleague has answers to provide these people.
As I said, the Canadian citizens should leave Lebanon now, but I can offer solutions to what the government could and should have done since October 7th. They should have listed 6 years ago the IRGC for the terrorists that they are. And they should ensure that every single one of those terrorists are sent out of this country. We know that there are 700 here that still roam around our communities. And after the incursions into Israel today, at no time in history is that more important to show Iranian Canadians and those fighting in the streets for freedom in Lebanon that they are on the side of freedom against tyranny. There is no time in history where the government should take this more seriously.
Yeah.
The honourable member for Sherwood Park, Fort Saskatchewan.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I thank my colleague for her excellent speech. She made one observation that I want to take particular note of, and that is about the constant mixed messages that we have from this government. She spoke about different members bringing different messages to different communities. It's worse than that. We have ministers, parliamentary secretaries, giving contradictory explanations of the conflict here in this House even tonight. It's clear that the government can't actually get a handle on taking any consistent position or defining the positions that they've taken. They're simply trying to have a kind of management of diversity of opinion on this without reference to any clear principles. And I wonder if the member can reflect on what that does for Canada's credibility when the government of Canada is literally taking contradictory positions in the course of tonight's debate and in general.
Very brief answer from the honourable member for Thornhill.
Madam Speaker, I think that the government has taken contradictory positions since the beginning of this. It started on October 9th when the Prime Minister came and stood with the Jewish community saying all of the right things. He sends one group of MPs into synagogues, into community centers, to say all of the right things about how they support one side of this conflict. And then they send another group of MPs into mosques and into other locations with other communities to say the exact opposite. It is not an issue of principle. It is an issue of policy.
Have to resume debate. The honourable member for Scarborough Centre.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I will be sharing my time with the member for Halifax West. Madam Speaker, just over 11 months ago, we had an emergency debate on Gaza. And now, here we are again in another emergency debate as this conflict continues to escalate from Gaza to the West Bank and now to Syria and Lebanon. I said it then, and I say it again now. There must be a ceasefire. The violence must end. This is a very dangerous moment in world history that threatens to pull in more countries and put more innocent civilians at risk. I am very worried about this continuing pattern of escalation. From the start, my heart and my worry has been with the innocent civilians. The innocent civilians in Gaza, in West Bank, in Lebanon, and in Israel. They want no part.
Said Israel last, eh?
They just want to be able to live their lives, to make a living, and to raise their children without the fear of bombing or rockets or missiles or ground invasions. This should be the right of every person, no matter where they live or call home. I visited the West Bank in January, and I met small children who go to bed every night fearful of sniper bullets. I saw the bullet holes near their bedroom windows. No one should have to grow up like this. Scarborough Centre is home to a vibrant Lebanese population, and I've been on the phone and in-person meetings with them nearly constantly over the past week. They are beside themselves with worry for their loved ones back in Lebanon. Communication with them has been spotty and unreliable, and as they watch the news of days of Israeli bombing that have killed hundreds, they hold their breath, waiting for a message from their loved ones so they know if they are alive or not. No one should be forced to live with this fear. No people in any country deserve this. They told me of one family in Lebanon who drove from the south to Beirut looking for safety with their baby and small children. Israeli bombs hit the road ahead of and behind them. They say the children will forever be scared by this experience. They tell me schools are being used as shelters, gathering mattresses and food and water. With the news of today's missile attack by Iran, the pattern of escalation continues and the danger for the innocent people of the region increases. I condemn all attacks that target innocent civilians. This conflict did not begin 11 months ago. These are not the first bombings of Gaza or Lebanon. These are not the first rocket or missile attacks against Israel. The roots of this conflict are deep and they must be addressed substantively. Madam Speaker, but what must be abundantly clear is that Israeli actions are not making anyone safer, not the people of Palestine, not the people of Lebanon, and not the people of Israel. Instead, this widening conflict is only making everyone more unsafe. The pattern must end. In December, Canada called for a ceasefire in Gaza. Last week, Canada joined the United States, the European Union, and 9 other allied countries in calling for a ceasefire in Lebanon. Unfortunately, last week's call for a ceasefire has been ignored, as was the one in December. Repeating the same thing that has failed again and again and expecting different results is a strategy proven to fall. It is time to move beyond statements. It's time for action. Canada must implement a clear and unambiguous two-way arms embargo. No Canadian manufactured weapons should be used to kill any innocent civilians. And there must be no loopholes such as shipping weapons via the United States. I welcome the recent comments by the Global Affairs Minister regarding an arms embargo, but I am asking the government for a clear statement that brokers no confusion, a clear and unambiguous two-way arms embargo. No qualifications or exceptions or asterisks for existing contract. And we must go further still. Madam Speaker, calling for a ceasefire and an arms embargo are the least Canadians expect. Let us look at the on-the-record public comments of Netanyahu and his cabinet, who have a habit of saying the quiet part out loud. On Israeli TV, Education Minister Yoav Kish said Lebanon and Hezbollah.
Let's see what else we got here. There's less than 10 minutes left. So the more I skip, the less time we got. And then there's a block, and then there's back to her. And that might be it, folks. I think, yeah. Out of people we want to hear, that's it. C'est tout fini. C'est tout fini. And that's the end of the emergencies debate. Nothing got accomplished, unfortunately. I mean, can you really be that surprised, though? I guess unless it's still going on. Oh yeah, it's still going on. We're just caught up.
Particularly over the last number of months. We must call and continue to call for all parties to de-escalate.
Well, I'll be damned.
War will not help anyone
C'est pas fini.
objectives. We must protect civilians, the elderly, the children, the women. We must safeguard the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Lebanon, a beautiful, diverse, proud nation that we should remember is smaller than the size of Prince Edward Island. 10,452 square kilometers. That number is etched in the heart and in the minds of all Lebanese people. Growing up, we used to buy, and we still do, necklaces that have those numbers on it. This is our Lebanon, nothing less. Speaker, I've been seeing posts all day today from people in my riding, of people that I know that break my heart, such as, in Lebanon, we survive in pieces, yet somehow remain whole. It's why we think of Lebanon as the land of heartbreak and hope intertwined. You see, Speaker, I was fortunate to live a number of years and attend elementary school in Lebanon. Then in 1975, the fighting started. Then it escalated.
Yeah, I gotta admit, man, I do not care what the hell she's got to say. I'm all tapped out, folks. I'm all tapped out here. I'm late for dinner with my family upstairs, so I think we're gonna wrap things up. I do want to acknowledge, though, the missed super chats and whatnot. Sorry to just cut everyone off, but look, let's all be honest here. Melissa Lanceman already spoke. Garrett Genius already spoke. Michael Chong already spoke. That's it. The Conservatives, the main people, are done. There's no Pierre. There's no Trudeau. It doesn't seem that way. So yeah, it's turning into a snooze fest here. And before we all start falling asleep, I think we're just gonna call it, right? So let me address some of the chats here. Canadian freedom. $10. Canada has become irrelevant on the world stage thanks to this NDP Liberal government. What a waste of time. Fix Canada. Absolutely. We have lost a massive amount of our reputation. It's going to take years for Canada to fix. To all those that are taking off, peace and love, everybody. I'll see you guys tomorrow. Same time for question period, so make sure you tune in. I'm going to keep reading off these super chats. Moody said the $2 they should sell the $9 million. Oh yeah, we already read that. Yeah, they should sell the condo to pay for the humanitarian aid if we still go that way. I agree. And then you've got Shotzi, not to be confused with Yahtzee with the 279. Think of our soldiers. Shut up with your politics. Absolutely. Absolutely. Think of the soldiers, man. So many people are going to die. The more we indulge in these wars, the more people are going to die. Gaurav with the $2 focus on Canada. This is not our war. I mean, that's preaching at the choir. I think everybody in here can agree. Robin Day with the $6.99, no message attached. Thank you nonetheless. I appreciate it. And Joe Uber again with the $20 on top of the $50. Holy smokes, man. Says someone needs to ask why Trudeau has someone on his security detail whose father works side by side. Oh, we already read that one. And then he sent it again. Works side by side with the Hussein as his personal pilot. Yes. I didn't know that, so thank you for educating some of us with the message attached to that super chat. Folks, that's it. We're all caught up. Thank you. I believe we're all caught up. If I didn't get to yours, I very much apologize. I'm pretty sure I got to all of them. I'll see you guys tomorrow. Same time for question period, 11 a.m. Pacific, 2 p.m. Eastern. Peace and love. Enjoy the rest of your night. And bye.